When my wife, 36, and I, 30, met, she told me she had epilepsy and would occasionally have seizures. She managed them pretty well, but sometimes it still happened. I wasn't too worried and continued dating her. We were together for 5 years before she had a seizure in my presence. It was terrifying. All I wanted to do was stop it for her, but I couldn't. I did everything I learned to do for her, and when it finally stopped and she came to, I was relieved. We were married that same year. Fast forward 11 years. She had seizures a little more often, about twice a year. Every time she had one, she told me she realized how fragile life was as she knew it. It was all dependent on her brain's health, which she couldn't control. She still worked, and I worried about her. One day, out of the blue, she tells me she wants to work more hours. I tried to tell her we didn't need more income, and I appreciated the time she spent at home with me and our pets. She wasn't convinced. She said she needed to dedicate her time to something, and she was passionate about crafts and wanted to earn more money. She already got a discount at the store, so more money meant she could buy more craft supplies. I finally gave in. I got the idea that she wasn't going to let this go, so instead of coming home at 2, she started coming home anywhere between 5 and 8. It was odd to me that even when I asked her to keep her schedule consistent and give it to me in advance, she never did. She said they'd change her hours even after printing them out. This was frustrating, and I'd spend a lot of nights alone with dinner ready, wondering if she was going to be home soon. I finally got tired of it and asked her to fully quit. She obviously said no, and added that she was enjoying herself. I told her I wasn't, and at least wanted to know when she'd be home each night. When her behavior continued anyway, I accepted defeat for a while. Just until I noticed that her paychecks didn't increase very much at all. We had a joint bank account, and her direct deposit was still happening, but it was as if she only took another 2 hours a week. This was the last straw. I installed a spying app on her phone while she slept. When she went to work the next day, I was going to know if she went anywhere else before coming home. Sure enough, she went to an address I had never seen before, in some random neighborhood. When she got home an hour and a half later, I couldn't contain myself anymore, and I confronted her. She laughed a soft chuckle and told me she just took her friend home from work, and afterward, they watched a few episodes of a show. She apologized for not letting me know and said she wouldn't go anywhere else after work again. I was surprised she was so calm and had a reasonable explanation for going somewhere else. I asked why her paychecks didn't go up, and she was still totally calm while she said it was because I was right about us not needing that much more money. So she upped the percentage of retirement money they took out of her pay. I was almost convinced. I apologized to her for being suspicious, but she said she understood why. We made love, and it was perfect. The next night, after she came home from work on time, she had a seizure. I gave her the medicine she needed, wiped the drool off her face, moved her hair behind her ear, and got her a pillow. She was pretty groggy and typed out a text on her phone. She dropped it on the floor next to her, and I happened to be able to see it. The message she just sent said, "I love you." Had to say it before it's too late. It instantly felt like I was floating without a body. I was in shock. The person she sent it to was programmed as Christy. My mouth started to dry, and I felt like I was going to choke on my own tongue. I actually gagged. My wife looked at me, starting to realize I was acting weird. I reached down to pick up her phone, and she grabbed it before me, asking me what I was doing. I told her I just saw her messages with Christy and needed to know what was going on behind my back. She looked like a deer in headlights. She couldn't believe she'd been so careless and threw her phone on the floor without turning off the screen. She tried to talk, but all that came out were squeaks and stuttering. I screamed at the top of my lungs for her to tell me. She jumped out of her skin and started shaking. She said she was hanging out with a girl named Christy after work every night. She thought at first they were just really good friends, but she realized it was really difficult for her to even stand one night apart from her. She was falling in love with Christy and wanted to keep seeing her. I jumped off the couch and started pacing while I asked her more questions. Now that she met Christy, she felt like she was always meant to be with her, and I was just a placeholder in her life. I was completely shaken and didn't know what I needed to say anymore. It was like nothing mattered at all, but I was mad. It felt like the emotional equivalent of trying to catch falling sand with your hands. It was frustrating, if not impossible, and why did it matter anyway? I immediately went to pack. I couldn't stay here, even if she was willing to leave. We were renting the house, so I figured I could find a different place to rent soon enough. My wife apologized to me, but it didn't seem sincere. She actually seemed amused, even though she was trying hard not to look that way. I went to stay at my brother's house. My ex was pretty happy for the first 3 weeks. She probably had Christy over a lot, maybe even for the whole time, but then beautiful consequences started to happen. Christy was a shift supervisor at their workplace, and she wasn't supposed to be in a relationship with any coworkers. When they transferred her to another store in a different town, it was more logical for her to move closer to it. When Christy left my ex's apartment, she told her their relationship was over. Short fling, if I ever saw one. My wife cried herself to sleep every night, leaving me extremely long voicemails that I never listened to all the way through. The divorce was final around the time my wife was evicted from our old place. She didn't work enough hours to pay the bills alone, and they didn't want her to work more hours. She stayed at a cheap motel for a week until she left town. She didn't tell me where she was going, just that she felt like the biggest fool in the world. She said she knew she had to go through this hard lesson of humility and accept fault for ruining our marriage. At least she learned something. I'd hoped she would never do something so stupid ever again, but what she did to me she couldn't take back. I found a place to rent and adopted a raccoon. He's awesome, and I've started seeing a nice girl, but we've only had one date. I am learning and accepting to live on my own for a while until I know for sure I'm ready to commit to someone permanently again. Wow, OP, you have been through a hellish relationship trauma. Make sure you always have emotional support people to confide in, and know for a fact that not all spouses would behave dishonorably. There are people who need a lot of self-growth, people who have moderately self-grown, and people who are rare, who have learned that people never stop growing, learning, and changing. To make foolish decisions is to be unaware or careless of what's truly important and honorable in life. The values that could bring true happiness and contentment into any relationship. Be humble, honorable, selfless, accepting of change, and communicative. Half of communication is listening, so always remember to take time to listen with interest to your spouse's words. They want you to know something, and they could be talking to anyone else in the world. You are their partner, and you influence their quality of life. Thank you for sharing your story with us. Now let's get into today's second story. My wife, 24, and I, 26, were married for 5 years without any problems. The problems started with her sudden onset of insomnia. Nothing changed in our life. We still lived in the same home and both still worked the same jobs. She would get home from work a little before me, but instead of coming home to a ready dinner made for the two of us, I came home to her on her phone, laying in bed. She said she already ate and stayed on her phone doing whatever. We had a 2-year-old at this point. She would usually be playing beside her in the bed, but I started to wonder if my wife was even paying attention to our daughter any more than a babysitter. She started taking walks in the middle of the night while I was sleeping. I woke up and saw she was gone from our bed, so I checked our baby's room, then downstairs, then opened the front door to see if the car was gone. I open it and find her standing there, about to come back into the house. She didn't have her keys in her hand and was still wearing her pajamas, so I believed her when she said she couldn't sleep and needed to get some air. Our neighborhood was safe, but I did ask her to try to stay in the house from now on. She didn't. It was several nights in a row that I would stir just as my wife was getting back into bed from God knows where. As I fell asleep each night, she was on her phone. I finally had enough. I asked her to let me see her phone one night, just before I fell asleep. She was stunned by my request and said she didn't need to give me her phone. I said if she was a good, loyal wife, there wouldn't be any problem. She was really upset with me now. She said I didn't trust her and she didn't have to stand for this. Before I could stop her, she locked herself in the bathroom with her phone. I thought I heard whispering, but if she did try to call, it was only for a few seconds. Then she came out and threw her phone at me, telling me I could look at it all I wanted, because she cleaned off all the evidence. I told her I wasn't the idiot she thought I was, and I knew something was going on. I said if she didn't stop all the odd behavior, I would hire a PI to follow her around. She gasped and said we couldn't afford that. It could be worth the investment, I told her. Not even 1 week later, I saw an Amazon charge on our account for 2 manly-type gifts. I think maybe, although doubtful, she bought me apology presents. I waited 2 days and found that the packages were delivered, but my wife hid them away. Before we went to bed that night, I saw charges from gas stations over the past month that we normally wouldn't drive to. She was definitely going somewhere after work, in the middle of the night and possibly during the day, when I'd assume she was working. I stayed awake in bed, waiting for her to leave like she always did. I didn't think it would be so easy to pretend to be asleep until 2:45 a.m. That's when she very slowly and quietly got out of bed. I watched her from the upstairs window as she got in her car and drove away. I went downstairs to look for any clues she might have left behind. I noticed I forgot to open the phone bill, and something told me to. For some reason, this time, they included a list of outgoing calls from my wife's cell phone. 233 calls in that month alone to a specific phone number. I called it from my cell. A man answered, wide awake, asking who this was. I told him my first name and asked if he was expecting a young woman, my wife's name, to arrive at his house in a few moments. He said yes, then asked how I knew that. I told him she was my wife, and I was pretending to sleep in bed until she left the house. He was speechless. He said the woman he was seeing wasn't married. Just as he said this, I saw my wife's wedding rings by the kitchen sink. I told him if she brought him the 2 items I saw on the Amazon order, she was my wife and he was her AP. He said if it was true, he would dump her at the same time as me. He said he was getting too old to be playing games and thought she was a serious, respectable woman. I said if she's guilty of what I think she is, she's not who we thought. My wife arrived there while he was on the phone with me. He just set down the phone. I could hear her greet him like he was her lover. Then I heard her say she had 2 surprises for him. He gasped in a scared way when he saw the items were the same ones I mentioned. He wasted no time and told her he had her husband on the phone right now. He handed her the phone and I said, "Hey honey, we're over." She squeaked and started crying against her will. She tried to say there was a misunderstanding, but we both waited, with me on speaker, for her to give an explanation, and she didn't know what to say. She tried saying she was planning to divorce me, which is why she started seeing this guy. I asked her if she told her AP about our 2-year-old daughter, and she did not. He said he had no idea she was married with a new child. He apologized to me, then broke up with her and kicked her out. She was screaming and crying, really freaking out. I couldn't understand what was happening, but the call was eventually dropped. Since she had a key, I moved the couch and other furniture in front of the doors to stop her from getting in. She tried to call me 13 times while I slept like a baby next to our 2-year-old. I knew I figured out what was going on, and it gave me so much peace I was able to rest well. The next morning, the police showed up. They told me my wife spent the night in the car because she couldn't get in, even though she lived here. I got the lease, which was in my name. I told them what was going on, and they told her they couldn't force me to let her in because the place was in my name. She insulted them, asking them what their job was, if not to help people. I was surprised she took it out on them so much. She freaked out about her daughter being inside, and the cops refused to get involved with that as well. She went to her mom's house, 2 hours away. They started figuring out what, if anything, they could do in her defense. Apparently, the evidence I had against her was more than enough to get better favor in the divorce and primary custody of our daughter. My ex had several boyfriends in quick succession, and it just made me extremely thankful that my daughter had a stable home environment with me. She started preschool and is doing great. She still sees her mom. I've started dating someone, but haven't introduced them to my daughter. I'm determined to be her stable father figure without other women coming in and out of our lives. OP, I am so sorry your wife made those terrible decisions. She never should have started communicating on a regular basis with another man without telling you. You could see the behavior changes, and I think you made the best decisions anyone could have made, given the circumstances. You were patient and communicative, although your wife wasn't. She apparently didn't know what she needed to do to avoid temptation and honor her marriage. Never stop honoring the person you chose to live your entire romantic life with. They change just as you do, but what should never change is open communication and love. Both are a choice. Don't judge or look down upon your spouse, because chances are you could be judged just the same. Thank you for sharing this story, OP. I hope you are able to heal from this situation. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. Take care.